All right, here we are at City Hall at Grain Valley. We're getting ready for our zoning board meeting to talk about a new conditional use permit for Valley Speedway. We've got some of our fans already here that are kind of coming to support us, and we're going to film this whole presentation where everybody will know who says what and what's going on and who's supporting us and who's not. And we'll see what the zoning board comes up with at the end of the night. They'll make a recommendation to the city council, and then the city council will make a ruling on it of what they would like to see for a new CUP. So stay tuned and watch what happens.
18th meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Let's go with roll call. Item number 2, Mike Renault's here. James Feisel.
Here.
Kevin Browning.
Here.
Bob DeMitt.
Here.
Carrie Boardman.
Here.
Debbie Saffel.
Here.
Hayden Ambrose.
Here.
And Scott Schaefer.
Here.
All right. With a quorum present. Next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes from the January 14th, 2015 meeting. Do we have a motion to approve?
I motion. Second.
Got a motion and second. Any discussion? No discussion. Let's have a vote. All in favor? Aye. Passes unanimously. Okay, so we have items 4 and 5. We're going to switch up a little bit tonight. The main item on the agenda is an action item precluded by public hearing. I want to talk about citizen participation for a little bit. Got a sign-up sheet in the back. If you want to participate in citizen participation, make sure you sign up on there. We're going to limit comments just because of the amount of people here to 2 minutes per person. That is your own time. It can't be designated to somebody else, so make sure you're concise. Let us know what's on your mind about the issues at hand, okay? Let's go ahead and move into the public hearing portion. And we're talking about tonight a conditional use permit that's been applied for racetrack facility at 348 East Old US 40 Highway. And this application is to be considered by the Planning and Zoning Commission for recommendation to the Board of Aldermen, which would then make it an ordinance. So anything we do tonight is a recommendation. This doesn't lock anything down, but we will be making a recommendation to the board one way or another. So let's get into the public hearing portion. How we're going to do this tonight, because there are so many people, we're going to give the city a chance to describe some of the history, things going on, how this kind of came about, and some of their ideas and thoughts on the topic. Then we'd like to open it up to the public generally. So that would be the time. If you could make an orderly line at that point, or just come up when the next person's finished. We'll be keeping track of the 2 minutes up here. And then after that, the applicant, Mr. Shrout, can come forward and kind of wrap us up before we close the public hearing out, and it moves over to the board at that point, the Planning and Zoning Board, for either a motion or no motion, but most likely some discussion one way or another. So any questions on that? Okay, so let's go ahead and start the public hearing portion. I'm going to turn it over to the city.
As Mr. Renault said, tonight we're here to consider a request for a conditional use permit from Dennis Shrout to operate a racetrack facility. By code in the city of Grain Valley, the only way to operate a racetrack is through a conditional use permit. And kind of touching on what he said earlier, process for that, once we get the application, is a public hearing at the Planning and Zoning Commission, and then follow that up with a public hearing at the Board of Aldermen level, where there'll be 2 reads to approve that. I kind of thought to give just a brief history of where we've been with the racetrack and kind of how we got here. December of 2003, Valley Speedway was issued a conditional use permit to operate. That was not Mr. Shrout at that time. He purchased the track later, but that kind of started Valley Speedway in Grain Valley. Since 2003, the racetrack has been a topic of conversation at numerous planning and zoning meetings, Board of Aldermen meetings, and just community development committee meetings, and pretty much any kind of meeting you can think of. And it's been split. There's been comments for and against, so support and a little opposition. And what we did was put a summary of those minutes together for anytime that was mentioned at the Planning and Zoning Commission level or the Board of Aldermen. That was included in the Planning Commission's packet, just kind of to give you an idea of the types of conversations that have taken place over the years. I would say the majority of the complaints over that time have been focused on sound level, races going late, and weeknight races. Those probably are the 3 things that have come up the most. Multiple sound studies have been conducted by both the city and Mr. Shrout. Last sound study actually was commissioned by Mr. Shrout. After reviewing the sound study results and the other conditions, the Board of Aldermen voted in July of 2014 to revoke the conditional use permit that had been in place since 2003. They made that decision effective October 1st, and in essence, he was able to finish out the year. At the same time, the board also told staff, or directed staff, to work with Mr. Shrout on a new conditional use permit. So we're here today. This is that first step, is having the public hearing in front of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Now with the permit itself, throughout this time, one thing that has become apparent is that obviously the racetrack emits a sound that's not something that you hear every day. And with that, when you hear it, it kind of can catch people off guard because it's something different. It's not the car you kind of get used to going up and down the street. So in some ways, it kind of, the racetrack is what it is. It's always going to be a different noise that people are going to think is maybe louder than what it really is. But when determining what conditions need to be tied to this permit, the important thing that needs to be thought about is what conditions most fairly allow the racetrack to operate, but also protect the other business and property owners in the city so they're not negatively affected. So it's kind of finding that balance is the whole goal. Included in the packet was kind of an outline of Mr. Shrout's request as far as what he would like to see included in the permit. I've kind of gone through these, and I'll read them off and then kind of give you our thoughts on those. 45 race car events per year, and this is not to include the March test and tunes. On a yearly basis, Mr. Shrout generally in March has some basically practice type sessions, so it's not a formal race. So you'd be looking at April to October, 7 months. And with that, it'd be, look at is, or what he's proposing is to have 2 weeknights, like a Friday and Saturday this week, and then the next week would just be one night, just Saturday. It can kind of get a little confusing, so we put a little exhibit together that just shows what that would look like from April to October if they did that switch off. And I'll touch on it in a minute, but it also shows the possibility of weeknight races. But with that, kind of right now, what Mr. Shrout has on his website is a tentative 2015 schedule. I believe shows 38 events. So just kind of give you an idea of what they're going for there. 11 o'clock p.m. curfew. Curfew is something that there's been comment going back and forth on. I think generally in the past he's tried to be done by 10. I don't know that that's happened every time, but I think that was kind of the general rule, was being done by 10. And kind of going into that, he's also asked for 90 decibels until 10 o'clock and 80 decibels from 10 to 11. One of the things that's kind of come out in some of these meetings is that 10 o'clock is kind of used as a break-off point to where you might have a certain decibel reading that's allowed, and then after 10 it goes down. It's just later at night. He also asked that we measure 1,200 feet from the center of the track with a 1 hour weighted average. With that, staff believes probably measuring at the property line is a little bit more accurate way to go for a few reasons. One of the biggest things, neither side has any control, the city or Mr. Shrout, with everything that's within that, would be within that 1,200 foot radius. So to know what's going to happen there in the future, you have to make a big assumption with that. You'd also have to make an assumption as to what that number would need to be. Just because all of our tests have been done at the property line, to go and now move it back to 1,200 feet from the center of the racetrack, that's kind of going in again and having to make assumptions and may or may not be right. And the question would be whether we can come up with that number that's correct. I think there's a good amount of data that's been collected over the years. And with this last study that Mr. Shrout did, we asked him to get a little bit deeper into it, because one of the items has been, what are we looking at with sound? Are you talking about the entire time the track is open, or are you talking about just the racing? And what we've been going at is just when the cars are on the track, what is the actual sound volume or sound level? And so we had Mr. Shrout's consultant go down and break out the feature events for the different classes. So just the time that the features were on the racetrack, and that's what's included in your packet. It's shown as the excluded time. And the number you want to pay attention to is where it says LEQ. That's a weighted equivalent average. That's something that we've kind of, both sides have agreed is the the proper way to measure sound. So it kind of takes out those peaks and valleys and kind of gives you that average number. With that, he'd asked for to look at a 1 hour weighted average. Kind of what we had talked about in the past was going to a 3 minute. But with that, what they submitted there, those particular tests, the loudest actual LEQ was 75.5. And I believe that was for the A mods that night, which typically would be the loudest class. And I think it also has the number of cars that are on the class that are on that sheet.
That was using the 3 minute or the 1 hour?
I believe on that one he went back to the 3 minute.
It's actually 1 minute.
1 minute.
It took an average 1 minute. Each one of those peaks is a 1 minute average.
So even shorter. And with that, it was still at 75.5. One of the things that's coming out time and time again from Mr. Stroud is that he doesn't want the track to be any louder than what it is, but he wants to be able to operate as it is. So that's something to keep in mind. We have those charts there. That's something to kind of go off of as far as a number. The next thing that had been brought up was all cars must meet the 100 decibel limit measured at 100 feet. It's something that we had talked about in the past. I don't know that that's necessarily a needed measure if we come to a reasonable agreement on a level at the property line. That just seems like another thing on top that may or may not coincide with that number. So if we can come to an agreement at the property line, that's something that's not going to change. The property line is going to be the property line. But that might be a better way to go about it. Next was the 7 weeknight events per year. When we say weeknight, we'd be looking at Monday through Thursday and consider Friday, Saturday, Sunday the weekend. Kind of an example for that would be one weeknight race per month, with the possibility. What Mr. Stroud's kind of told staff and the board in the past is that most of the weeknight races are going to be a traveling series or something to that effect, where there's not as much control as far as scheduling. And with that, there could be 2 nights that are tied, 2-3 nights that could be tied there. So however that combination happens, that would all count towards that 7 weeknights that would be allowed in this scenario. Historically, weeknights have drawn more complaints than the weekends. One of the things that we have heard quite a few times is that if we're going to have the weeknight races, it just needs to be when school is not in session, because that's been the biggest complaint is kids going to school for trying to go to bed to get ready for school and not being able to sleep. So that might be something to keep in mind with that. All car classes must run a functional race muffler. Couldn't agree with that more. That's something that I'm sure everybody's heard multiple times is what mufflers on the cars, and it kind of seems to be changing all the time. One of the things we would say is, on both sides, with the city and Mr. Shrout, that we'd hope we'd be looking at all the different manufacturers to see if there is something new out there in the future. But the idea being, obviously, that it's not going to be any louder than it is now. The next thing was the city will not limit quieter events. And by quieter events, they're not motorcycle events, demo derby, truck and tractor pulls, go-kart events, all non-motorized events, and any event with less than 10 cars on the track at a time. It's kind of a tough condition to think about. Now, obviously, the non-motorized events, there's no limit on that. That doesn't fall into the racetrack, the permanent part of it. So whether it's a Tough Mudder thing or anything like that, that wouldn't count. When you start looking at these other things, it's kind of hard to say because I don't think any of us really know what that level would be for those events. I don't know that we've tested any of the, the truck and tractor pulls. A lot of times tend to be pretty loud, but I couldn't tell you exactly what that would be. So that's kind of that's one that you're gonna have to think about there. That's kind of a tough one on that because it's kind of hard to blanket all of those things together and just say yes or no. So maybe Mr. Shroud can shed some more light on that a little bit later here. The last thing I have is the length of the permit. By code in the conditional use section, you are allowed to establish a length of time for a permit. And kind of been advised that maybe 3 years would be something that would be reasonable. The thought behind that being a lot can happen in 3 years as far as whether it's different technology or any number of things that can happen. So at the end of that 3-year period, making sure that everything's still reasonable and it still works. But it is enough time to be able to plan forward. It's not on a year-by-year basis that way. that's kind of the quick and dirty, I guess, on what we're looking at here with the permit. That's kind of taking into consideration what Mr. Strout has given us that he would like to see included. And after hearing comments from the public tonight and Mr. Strout, that's going to be your job to decide if those conditions or other conditions are appropriate and moving forward with it.
Okay, any other comment from the city? Okay, any need for clarification from P and Z? Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the public portion of the public hearing. Does anyone have any comments they would like to make? If you do so, please step forward.
Yes, County Zoning Commission. My name is Andrew Herman.
If you would state your name.
Andrew Herman.
And then your.
I am a lifelong resident of this area, though, and my family has been. Motorsports is on the master plan, has always been on the master plan when Push for Improvement was started in this area back in the old regime of the city of Grand Valley. I am for the development of Grand Valley. I'm also a commercial real estate broker and developer. I've worked on some other sites. What you have here is a destination for people to come. And with calculations I've done just roughly off motel rooms that can be rented and money to spend at Casey's and our food places like Sonic and McDonald's, it's about $153,000 about every other month in revenue. That's just a low ball number. That's about every 7 races is what we're going off of. That does not count fuel that's bought at Casey's. This is people going in and purchasing things.
The question, and this won't go into your time, but those numbers, you're attributing that directly to the races?
To the races only. Yes.
Okay. How do you get that?
By rough estimates of how many people come to the races, you're running about 500 people through the races, besides citizens and spectators and also drivers.
Per month?
I'd say about every race has about 300 to 500 people at it. Okay, and then you guys give your numbers on how much they spend, and that varies due to fuel prices, and that varies due to what they eat also. And coming from the commercial development side, you have what they call destination places. Bass Pro is one of the sites I've helped on in Independence and the event center. Some of the things you see when somebody comes to your area to look, like McDonald's, they do 3 to 5 years worth of research at the median household income in the area. What draws people to the town? Grand Valley is just on I-70. They can go to Oak Grove because they have a Walmart. That's a destination for people. We have something here. If we work it right, we actually can produce a nice town with more development, more tax revenue coming in from business instead of citizens, which help pay for the schooling, schools, roads, and such like that. So I am for the racetrack staying. I know there's a noise ordinance, but I live out at 901 Northwest Poplar. I grew up at Pink Hill and Buckner Tarzan out north here, and they sound like bees. And I know there's a difference, but you also have an opportunity, along with the noise levels. I can hear whiskey tangos at that location, at my house at 901 Northwest Poplar. So we're sitting here trying to close somebody down or suspend somebody's business that can generate revenue like Whiskey Tangos does. And Whiskey Tangos is also a younger person's destination spot, where this is bringing from 17 different states. We're having racers come from Kansas, Iowa, Nebraska, Arkansas. I can't remember what other states, but I think Oklahoma runs a lot of them. And they might not be here all the time. That's what those 7 races he's talking about during the weeknights. Those people will take lodging, they'll take more fuel, and more beverage for themselves. And that's all I have to say about it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
Question for you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Actually, my question's for the city based on something that you said. Is there any way to measure, do we see an increase in sales tax versus race months where we have the track racing versus those months where we don't? I mean, do we see those numbers at all? Do you have any way to check into that?
Steele's mic here. So we don't have access to individual business sales tax records.
We can tell month to month sales tax incomes, and typically it's more of an economic driver, but the fall time is usually when we have the most sales tax come into the city. I would say it's pretty flat throughout the summer. There's not really any high peaks or not. And just one further point of clarification, I think what he was referring to is revenue is probably gross revenue coming into the city. As far as somebody pays $20 for a dinner, that's $20 towards that $157,000. I do know that in order to generate that much sales tax, it'd be $6 million a month. So, but yeah, it's pretty level throughout the year, Mr. Spicer.
Understood. I just wanted to clarify, because with sales tax, you can at least see if there's going to be an increase or decrease during those time frames on the amount of revenue coming in.
Yeah, and one of those things, race fans have always, been good about when they come to town, they fuel up, they stop at Casey's, that sort of thing. We're not going to see an increase from the fuel. That's not a positive or a negative statement, but we're not going to see those numbers reflected just because all that money goes to the state and then it's dispersed to us based off of our population. So it's really hard for us to use that indicator as far as how much business is coming. But I know any night that we have a race down there, Casey's is packed. They love it. So.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comment?
I wrote it down. Hello, my name is Larry Waters. I'm not a speaker and probably not saying this proper format, but I'd like to say something. I am interested in to see what your plans are for your town, Valley Speedway. This is a family affair giving back to the town of Valley. He's not a rich man. What do you people plan to do? Yes, times are changing. Why not be family oriented? He's out there, out of the track by at least 10 p.m. on a Friday and Saturday night. Why not make a change and keep out-of-towners and business owners coming through your town? Maybe business would stay open longer. Thank you. Like I say, I live in Kansas City, Kansas, and when we come up here, we bring 2 or 3 people. We stop, we eat on the way home, we buy gas. Not all the time at Valley, Blue Springs, but a lot of the trouble you have is a lot of businesses aren't open past 9 o'clock. I mean, you got your fast food restaurants, McDonald's, Subway, but Zarda's closed. A lot of the other ones close. Taco Bueno, they all close early. So, thank you.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
You live in Kansas City, Kansas. Is the Lakeside Speedway still open out there by the house?
Mm-hmm.
Why do you come out here instead of on the Lakeside?
I raced there on Friday nights.
Okay.
Finished 6th in the points, and I won the championship in Valley this year. So, but I like it. It's a different track. I've been racing Lakeside since '94, and Lakeside's always had its problems. I don't know if you've heard about them, but it's always had their problems. It seems like when I go other places, I got wins at Heartland, I-35, I-70, Valley. These smaller tracks are just more home body people. I like going to the town. I mean, it's just a fun place to go. Lakeside, it's out there nowhere. I live 9 miles from Lakeside. So like I said, I've been going out there for 20 years. But it's more of a big corporate deal, Lakeside is. Valley is, family oriented. The kids are involved in it. There's a lot of things going on. It's not all, I don't know what you'd say, corporate or, it's fun. That's one of the reasons why I did so good, is because I'm hard strung for Lakeside, and when I came over here, that's the honest truth, that I was diligent in everything I'd done. That's why I attribute it to that, why I did so good this year.
Questions? All right, thanks, sir.
Good evening. My name's Alan Hanaway. I've lived in Grain Valley a little bit over 30 years. I've seen a lot of changes. Seems like the last 4 or 5 years around the city, when I go somewhere, I'm pretty well labeled up. And people say, "You're from Grain Valley?" And I say, "Yeah." And they say, "Well, we've been there. We've heard of you." The track has seemed to really got recognition around Kansas City. A lot of businesses have come to Grain Valley, big businesses. just because of the track. So I think you all need to consider that, and possibly more big businesses would come to Grain Valley. Thank you for your time.
It's a question, because
All right.
the comment about a lot of big businesses coming due to the track. Specifically, what are you referring to?
I consider O'Reilly and Advance a big business.
Okay.
You know, they came here to sell lots of parts, and some other businesses, there's some other auto companies that have came here which support those businesses.
All right, thank you.
I'm Jim Blaine. I have Valley Laundry here in like Great Valley and some other rentals, and this, that, and the other. I've been involved in the racetrack, since I think it was '03. I did not receive the packet you all got. So I can't imagine the amount of meetings that I've come to this very room and listened to and gone over. You had an advisory committee. Please help me on what year that was that you had a citizens advisory committee. We watched that, we heard from them. If my recollection is right, the track was go. Now, I assume that that went to the Board of Aldermen. I don't know how the city works. Was that ignored? Did you just waste the time of the citizens? How much more information does it really take to make a decision? I think that's one thing that I'm really kind of questioning. You guys seem like some smart people, a lot smarter than I am. But this decision seems to be kind of odd and always seems to be outweighed at every one of these meetings. And I've come to all that I knew of. I advertised very heavily in the high schools, the city, the event that that the police have, you know, like out here at the park. I advertised with the track. I mean, I feel like a lot of, I don't know how much a lot is, but like a lot of my business comes out of the races. Because like usually race fans are very loyal, you know, like to the people that really kind of support them. But I'm really questioning, man, how much more info can we go over about this? I mean, it's just mind-blowing to me that we just rehashed this, well, since '03. It's been a long time ago, guys. And a lot of people have gone through here, and I'm going, what are we thinking about? I mean, you know, I guess it's time to put on your big boy and big girl shoes, make a decision, and then let's go on. But it sure looks to me, or let's have an election. Let the citizens vote on it, like this next election come up, and then just, hey, go either way, but it's time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Got you any questions?
I'm pretty clear. Actually, you maybe have a question.
Good job. I have a comment.
Okay.
I absolutely agree with you. I mean, there has been a lot of information going back and forth. The problem that we have is that we had a conditional use permit that was being broken. Okay, and that was put in place by all of those people and organizations that you stated. And they set that at 65 decibels, okay, at the property line. We're going off what the conditional use permit said. I don't disagree that we need to look into this and make it to where Mr. Shrout can possibly continue to do business. But that's why we're here. We're here to make it to where he can and he's not breaking any city regulations. You know, and we can all do this together and get this moving forward. That's why we're here. That's why we're having.
And I appreciate that, Jim. I really do. And but man, you know, I mean, Grain Valley is like an island or like a ship at sea. I don't know if anybody's in the Navy, but man, you're just there by yourself, and we're surviving in kind of a rough economy. I don't care what they say, and we have an identity. Like a lot of people come to that laundromat and go, "Gee, what's our identity?" Okay, we've got RV places lined along the highway. We have I mean semi places, I mean selling semis. We've got 2 auto parts stores, 3 racetracks, ODI out here, Chuck. We're a transportation community. What else are we? You know, let's just look at it. No, we're not an antique store community. Man, let's kind of face what we're doing.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you very much. So if I could just piggyback off what Mr. Fleischer said. We are here to try to work something out. And so just, again, I encourage you to keep your comments very concise. I don't want to make this a big political hullabaloo. So we are really trying to work out something between so we can empower Mr. Trout to continue. But we want to make sure that the rules, whatever they are recommended, are clear. So, thank you, sir.
My name is Brandon Trout. What I'd like to point out to the board is what the track's become. In 2008, the track was purchased as a racetrack. And since that time, when it was bought and I started going out there, that's all I saw as the racetrack. Over the years, it's become way more than that. With the community, we have kids out there all the time. It's like the gentleman earlier said, it's more of a destination place now. Families from all over, as far out Topeka, Kansas, make the drive out to Grain Valley every single week to race out there. And it's kind of taken on a whole new meaning. Since when we first started, it was just about the racing. And now, any given weekend, you can look at the schedule out there, and there's some type of community event, fundraiser, something like that that's going on that draws attention to the city of Grain Valley and the cooperation that the people in the city are. And they're out there not only spending their money at the racetrack, they're donating, and it puts a good light on the city. It shows the generosity that this city has to the less fortunate out there. When we started these meetings 2 or 3 years ago going over this permit, one of the biggest complaints was racing 2 nights in all the races that were out there. Last year, he's cut the schedule back almost in half of what it was. What he's proposing for the CUP is reasonable. From what I've been to all these meetings. A lot of it is what the citizens have asked for. They asked, they didn't like 2 nights racing. It's been cut back to, almost 1 night with a little bit of Friday sprinkled in here. I think we're at a point now where the board has something they can vote on that not only works for the track, it works for the citizens too, because they're meeting the expectation of what the citizens have asked for in the meetings I've been to. And that's, I just encourage you guys to listen to what he's saying and get this thing going where we quit spinning our wheels and get on down the road. Thank you.
My name is Stan Fierstein Jr. I live I just want to say that, I've always been for the track. It really is a family destination, I've taken my kids out there since they were young. My son's going to be turning 13 here in May, and it just happens to fall on Saturday night. He said, "Dad, can I have my birthday party at Valley Speedway?" I said, "Sure, I'll talk to him and we'll get something lined up for you." So, so many kids out there and so much, what it brings to something for a family to do together. Racing is something that is in a lot of people's blood. It's been there for years. And as far as people from coming from all different places, I know the guy that races in my division, that he comes down all the way from Iowa every week. He came down here to race. And other than, I had something else to say, but lost my train of thought. So, other than that, I just hope everything can be worked out. There is some noise, but you know what? Anything that comes out here can be noise, and sometimes when the racetrack isn't going, as the sand drags are going, the sand drags are louder than the actual race. The And, nights we'll be sitting out there at the racetrack, and they'll have a national event going on at the sand drags, and a couple of them cars go down the sand drags, they drown out the noise from the racetrack. So, whatever it is, it's just, I just want to say thank you for having the racetrack here. I hope it's able to continue to stay here, and we can all work together. It's just a great family place. Thank you.
Thank you.
Douglas Mellon of Dalton, Missouri. If we take this racetrack away, where are the kids going to go? They're going about street racing, endangering people's lives? What about all the kids that want to go have fun? Where are they going to go? Nowhere. Except sit at home, maybe go to the movie theater, make them rich. But not all kids want to go sit down, sit on their butt, and watch TV. They can do that at home playing video games. They want to go outdoor, play in an environment where it's fun, have enjoyment time. All that stuff.
Step right up.
My name's Robert Grove. I've been a direct TV technician in this area for a little over 5 years. I do a lot of work in the Green Valley area. I've probably been in some of your homes. I've did so many jobs, saw the faces and people kind of run together. But in the 5 years I've been installing, I have not had one customer say anything negative about the track. It's all been positive. I say the airport, the train track has been the biggest concern. It's kind of short and sweet, but just a little over 5 years, hardly no complaints. I just think that speaks for itself. Thank you.
Before you start, Mr. Groves, so the complaints you've heard about the track and the airport, what have you heard about that in comparison?
Well, I always ask when I go in, so I'm a racer, I race out there, and I ask, I'm like, does the noise bother you? And they're like, no. The trains going off and middle of the night, for people that live closer to it. Mm-hmm. And then the airport, they said, we want to talk about rumbling some windows. So, but I just wanted to throw that out. I go to a lot of people's homes, and I do a lot of work in Green Valley, Oak Grove, in this area. I think the one complaint I had was an older lady. I give her all brand new remotes, she still complained. So there was no police involved. So but anyway, that's just my 2 cents.
Norm Combs. Drive. Wake up, Scott.
When your name down.
The last gentleman beat me to the noise from the airport. Back in '03, when the track opened up, the noise level was a little high in my neighborhood because they didn't have any mufflers on it, and it persisted. But I guess the sound of it was different. But if you got a bunch of flowers pollinated, you got to put up with bumblebees, and that's a little bit different, something like that. The airport had more noise than the track ever did, because I've heard planes flying after dark, early in the morning when I'm trying to sleep. The train track, the railroads, the trains, with their whistle blowing through town before 6 a.m. And I'm old, I like to get my sleep, and if I get awakened and I can't get back to sleep, you know how that goes, Scott. You're there. I-70, you have traffic on there. But it's normal noise. People put up with it. The airport is a destination if you happen to have an airplane. The railroad is, I mean, some people like to go down and watch the trains go by. It's just in their nature. They don't spend a lot of money doing it though. But our track is one of the few destinations we have in town. You have the Brass Armadillo. I've heard people say, oh, you live out where the Brass Armadillo is. Oh, you live out where Whiskey Tango. I don't think we can have too many destinations. But last summer, is my time up?
Nope.
Last summer, the racing season was halfway over with before I realized that we had a racing season. Because Mr. Shroud had to put some mufflers on the cars. And to me, the noise is just something that's not normal. And that's why people complain. Not because they're exceptionally loud. Back in '03, they had trouble stopping the races on time because they kept running over beyond the 10 or 11 o'clock, whatever the cutoff was. But again, nothing wrong with having a destination here in town. There's a lot of people like it. Thank you. I'm open for questions. I don't have any answers.
Okay, thank you.
As a teenager, I grew up at the old lakeside and then had to drive out to the new lakeside. And when my significant other, which is the DirecTV technician back there, found out that Valley Speedway was out here, it was wonderful. I have 2 boys at home that like to get involved in the video games, sit home, watch TV and all of that. When we started coming to the racetrack, we were here 1 year watching, and the next year, this gentleman back here with his hat on is now racing at the age of 15. He's not out on the streets racing. He's not out doing drugs, drinking alcohol. I know where my kids are at every single weekend. And I think you guys really need to take that in consideration. Unfortunately, I'm a friend of Grain Valley's resident site on Facebook, and I'm seeing there's a lot of crime going on. Cars getting broken into, houses getting broken into. That's another thing with the Speedway. We're open at odder hours of the evening that most of your people aren't around here, so it's going to keep the traffic moving and possibly get rid of your problem here in Grain Valley of, you know, obviously in the summertime, but not in the winter, but in the summertime that could help, the more traffic you have coming through. That's it.
All right, thank you. Public comment. Okay, so before we close that portion and turn it over to Mr. Shroud, I know this is a pretty pro-track crowd, but I don't want to exclude anybody. Is anyone against the idea? Just so we know. Without having the right comment, I don't want to put you on the spot. Okay, good deal. All right, so let's move on. Mr. Shroud, I'd like to turn the floor over to you. If you'd like to take some time to make some comments, please.
Hey, I know it's not my turn, but are the pros and we're the pros, but I mean, the other ones, do these people show up? I mean, who's?
So,
you know what I'm saying?
It's a good question.
You know, yeah. I mean, not that I don't believe you guys that there's legitimate complaints, but I'm just wondering.
Sir, if you don't mind, I'd like to address that.
Sorry.
I've actually been spending a lot of time walking around the community and talking to a lot of the residents in Grain Valley. And to be honest, I'm not hearing a lot of negative comments. I have heard a few. You know, and I believe that they have legitimate complaints. However, not being in their living room when a race is going on, it's hard for me to say whether it is or is not legitimate. What I will say is that yes, there are some people out there that have complained about the track. There are some people out there that aren't comfortable stepping forward in a public forum to explain their concern. But by and large, I think I've heard more support for than against.
clarify again, we're not here, this isn't an up and down vote of whether or not the track can go forward. This is more, we're trying to work out the details if it were to be able to go forward. How does that look? So I know there's a lot of comment made whether or not we're going to approve allowing racing. That's not really what our purpose is here tonight. So just want to mention that. So Mr. Shrout, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. I appreciate you guys taking the time to listen to the people. I guess the picture that I brought up there for you guys to look at is a weekly race. It was a fall event. That isn't even a national event. There's about $10 million worth of equipment represented in that picture sitting in the pits at the racetrack. I guess what I'm trying to get through to you, this isn't a bunch of hillbilly rednecks out there that are just drinking beer and raising hell every weekend. There's a lot of money that's spent out there, and these are very influential people that spend a lot of money on this sport. And this isn't even counting the national events that we bring in. I mean, we've had Tony Stewart race at our track 3 different times. J.J. Yaley. I mean, we've had several NASCAR drivers come to our track to race. So, I mean, I want to make it very clear that, you know, we're just not a bunch of, you know, like I said, hillbillies out there just drinking beer and, you know, causing trouble. I don't think the police department, if you talk to them, they don't come out there. We don't have issues. And I guess the economic impact is something extremely important to consider. Not trying to, I guess, devalue the city of Green Valley, but there's really not a lot of reason for anybody that doesn't live in this town to come to this town. You know, and again, I'm not taking away from anybody. There are a few places that do bring people from out of town, but we bring people from all over the Midwest to come to Green Valley to watch our races. We've had events out there that come from New York just to watch races on these national events. There's a lot of people that follow these events, stay in our motels, eat here. And that's one of the reasons that whenever, again, Ken, I think, alluded to the fact that, you know, we would like to do at some point in time some 2- and 3-day events, that these people will come to town and they'll stay in town for 3 or 4 days at some of these big events. So that's kind of the reason that's in there. The thing that I put together to show you of what the racetrack is looking at is something that I know what it takes to run a racetrack. I've done it for several years now, and I guess if you guys start tearing apart what I've come up with, it's not going to work. You know, if you guys try to tear this down to where I'm not sure exactly, and I'm not saying this is what you're going to do, but I tried to be conservative on what I asked for and what we needed. I'm not saying that a few of these things can't be tweaked, but whenever this whole thing started, like Jim was talking about, they kept having us come to these meetings and the Citizens Advisory meeting and stuff, and saying we needed to work something out, and it was never worked out. I mean, whenever we had our meetings, whenever they had the meeting saying they were going to have a meeting to cancel our conditional use permit, the mayor asked council if we came to an agreement before that meeting, they didn't have to cancel the conditional use permit. And he said, no, if we can come to an agreement before then, we don't have to cancel it. Well, I'm not sure what happened, but, you know, and Ryan, you was at that meeting over there. I mean, it's like we had these meetings and people got up and spoke, and it fell on deaf ears. It never went anywhere. And I'm not sure why. Because the mayor, whenever this all started, was going to go to the Citizens Advisory Committee, and they was going to make their recommendations. We was going to come to you guys. You would make your recommendations, and we'd go back to the city and try to come up with a compromise. That didn't happen.
So if I could interrupt you for a second, just to clarify. Not that I want to get muddled down with the history, because we want to go forward.
I understand.
So the CUP, the agreement time, that period you guys were trying to work something out, was that to modify the CUP at that time, or?
That's what I understood, yes.
Okay, so there were changes still need to be made, kind of like we're doing tonight.
Correct.
Okay.
Without canceling it.
Okay, I guess that was what I was trying to clarify, because if there was a modification, it would seem like maybe this is more of a legal question, but it would.
I can address the history of it. I mean, well, what happened was, I mean, I think what you're talking about are the meetings that we had in like July of 2013 over at the community center and the citizens committee. That there was discussion about trying to modify the CEP without the revocations. We weren't able to get a modification agreed to, and then so the board went forward with the revocation hearing last summer. And at the revocation hearing, part of the direction that the Board of Aldermen gave to city staff was to try to work out a new conditional use permit. So that's where we're at.
Well, I guess, again, I'm not trying to be combative or argumentative, but you said we couldn't come to an agreement. It never went anywhere. It never came up to even for discussion after the Citizens Advisory Committee, and they made their recommendations. And the next step was we were supposed to come to here, and that came straight from the mayor. We was going to have 2 meetings, Citizens Advisory, come to the zoning board, and then back to the city for a compromise. And none of that stuff happened.
I mean, I don't want to get bogged down in it because I think that we
Well,
do want to
yeah,
go
I
forward.
mean,
But I mean,
well,
we went through this at the revocation
Guys,
hearing
hold on,
about the
if we could,
discussion.
I'm gonna interrupt you because I don't want to get muddled in.
All right, I understand. I understand. I just want to give you some history of what has happened in the past.
I appreciate that. So not to, because I want to keep the spirit of working out something going forward here. Let's table that for however remedy you want to affix to that. But thanks for clarifying. So keep going.
Okay, I guess the economic benefit, I've had Casey's send me letters basically stating that they don't have 3 Casey's stores in any town, in any place that they do business in the country except Green Valley because of Valley Speedway. They said had they known that there was issues with the Speedway, they probably would have not built the store that's out here on the side of town. That they count on that racetrack to bring in business for their stores. They built the new store out here where they moved just across the street. The reason they did that was because they couldn't hold enough gas, ice, and beverages for the race fans during race season. So they built a new store across the street to accommodate the race fans. The regional manager from McDonald's came out to the racetrack and talked to me about what was going on here. And he said, you know, whenever we put our McDonald's store in Green Valley, one of the things at the top of our list is what other incidental business are we going to get besides the residents in a town that are going to stop and buy our product. And he said Valley Speedway was number 1 of why we came here, because the business that the Speedway brings in season is what we count on for profit. And the same thing with O'Reilly's, said that the reason that O'Reilly's is out on that end of town is because the racetrack's on that end of town. So I mean, the economic benefit, I don't know how much weight it carries into this, but it's pretty high. And it's, you know, there's a lot of income that's brought in because of the racetrack. And it's like, I forget who said something, that, you know, the dollars that he was talking about are gross dollars. But just because it's not sales tax, those businesses count on the income to make a living. You know, it's not all about the sales tax. I mean, the income that's brought into the business that they count to pay their light bill, to pay their taxes, is also income that's needed for them to be prosperous. So, again, just keeping that in mind, it's not all about the sales tax, even though that's a big part of it. The income to these businesses is substantial. And I work for O'Reilly part-time, helping deliver parts. They're one of my sponsors at the racetrack. And I talk to a lot of businesses in town, and I always ask, I said, you know, hey, I'm Valley Speedway. What's your thoughts on it? I've never had one negative comment. They all think that it's great, that it brings income, and it's good for the city. So, again, just the economic benefit. And also, I think I was talking earlier, whenever you look at some of these sound issues, we've done sound issue after sound study. I think we've got more than enough data to where you guys can make an intelligent decision based on the data, not on what anybody's saying, or, you know, some of the stuff that said is just absurd, you know, in the past. So I haven't heard any of that tonight, but in the past, with some of the stuff that's in the packet that he gave you, I mean, there's people complaining about the fumes from the track. I mean, there's 80,000 cars going down I-70, come on. You know, racetrack with 25, 30 cars on the weekends, that's reaching. Is there any questions that anybody has? I'd be more than happy to.
The main thing I hear from residents is noise. And the best way I can explain it, if we had the air conditioning system cut on right now in the middle of our conversation, it would be disruptive to our meeting if it was extremely loud. Granted, it might only last 3 or 4 minutes, but that's 3 or 4 minutes where we're going to have to talk louder, where we have a little bit of discomfort level, where something could be misconstrued as being said in a manner that it wasn't intended because we had to speak louder. I think the citizens are concerned about the noise levels. What can we do from the city's end, from your end, to minimize the impact of the noise? Some of it we can't change. We are Grain Valley. There is a valley here. We have residents that sit higher than the Speedway. The sound travels. We all know that. I live in where I live, Woodbury, and I can hear the Speedway. But if I go up the street and around the corner, it's much louder because of the way the sound travels across the terrain. I don't know that there's answers to fix all that.
We did a sound study, we did a sound study on a Friday night that we weren't racing. This was just this fall. And on Saturday night when we were racing, and did right there at Woodbury where that pond is, we tried to pick the place that the noise would be the loudest, where there was nothing in front of it, no houses, right there where that pond is. And the difference between Saturday night when we were racing and Friday night when we were not racing was 3 decibels. And I'm not saying that you can't hear it, but just because you can hear it don't mean it's offensive. And that's part of the problem. If people can hear the racetrack for whatever reason, well, it's offensive because they can hear it. And that's what reason I said, look at the sound studies, because what a lot of these people are saying, it just doesn't, it doesn't hold facts. You know, you can hear the track, but 3 decibels, if you look at any sound study, 3 decibels is undetectable to the human ear. The human ear can't detect 3 decibels. So if you're listening and somebody turns something up 3 decibels, you can't really tell. So, and that was the difference, and that was over a 6-hour period. We left this sound meter on. It wasn't just a handheld meter that somebody standing there with. We left it on for 6 full hours, and it was 3 decibels difference. And I understand what you're saying about people mentioning that they can hear the track, but just because you can hear it don't mean it's offensive. And
well, unfortunately, offensive is so subjective.
Well, and
if I'm the one trying to go to sleep, then I find it offensive.
Yeah, well, and the definition of noise is anyone that's sound. So,
right.
I mean, if you go to Washington, there's a lot of noise. So. Again, it's a racetrack. It's, you know, it's been there. The conditional use permit was issued 10 years ago. I try to be as good of a neighbor as I can possibly be. We do fundraisers out there constantly, food drives. We try to give back to the community. We give the school tickets. We've helped them with their booster club, giving them tickets to come out and sell them and keep them there. So we're very community minded, and it's whenever we race, you're going to hear it. But just because it's 3 decibels higher doesn't mean it's an offensive noise. But I understand what you're saying.
I've got a few questions, Mr. Shroud. First question, in the past, how many weeknights were you running?
Whenever we first opened up, every Saturday, actually every Friday. And then we switched to every Saturday when CMS closed. And then for 2 years, we raced Friday and Saturday. We ran an open wheel program Friday night and a stock car program on Saturday night. Last year, or 2 years ago, we went back to just strictly racing Saturdays and racing 1 Friday a month. And I think it came up to about 35 to 38 races.
Now, I'm more specifically asking about the weekday nights, so like the Wednesdays, Thursdays.
I've never raced more than 3 times during the week ever. Ever.
How many times in a season?
3 times.
Just 3 times
total.
Yeah, I've never ever raced more than 3 times in any given year. And if you notice on this year's program, I think there's 2 Wednesdays.
Okay. Just for my understanding of what you're asking for when you say sound measured 100 feet behind the car, defined at 3 to 4,000 RPM. How many RPM is typically a vehicle running when it's going around the track?
6,000 to 7,000 RPMs. And we aren't making these figures up. I've called racetracks all over the United States. So, I mean, these things that you see on here are what other tracks are doing. I mean, I'm not just sitting out there at the racetrack making stuff up. I'm trying to base what we need to do on what other tracks are doing. So that's kind of, And Brian Brown, you've got a national caliber race car driver right here in Green Valley. That, I mean, he's a world-renowned race car driver, and that's what he said. When they go to out-of-town tracks, and most people say all these tracks are out in the middle of nowhere. That's not right. Most of these big racetracks are right in the middle of town, every place they're at. And he said that's how they check them. They got a rope they put on them. They get a sound meter. They go out 100 feet, and you have to be under that decibel reading to race. If you're not under that decibel reading, you can't race.
No, and that's fine. I'm just asking questions just for my
I understand. Okay, that's fine.
Okay, I know one of the things that you've said quite frequently is that, you know, you don't intend to be any louder. You don't want to do any more than what you're currently doing. So then why are you asking for 90 decibels when what you're measuring at is 75.5?
It depends on how you take the reading. I mean, the reading that you take, most of the tracks, I didn't find any track that was under, I think 85 decibels was the lowest track I found anywhere. Knox, just to give you an example, Knoxville, which is a major track in the United States, is 104. That's what their decibel reading is. So, I mean, it's how you make it. The way we took these readings is a time-weighted average. And if you go out there with the sound meter, if you look on there, it shows the spikes of what the highest reading is. So, I mean, it's all going to depend on how you take it. And that's the reason I came up with the thing with the muffler. It's an easy way to take it and make sure the cars, each individual car, is where they need to be. To do a sound study, I mean, you're talking a lot of time and a lot of money to do one of these sound studies and do it right. So I was trying to come up with something that we could do to make sure if an out-of-town driver came in, we could check his car and make sure that it's quiet enough that we're not going to go over our decibel readings.
So as to that, because I had the same question, unless Ken misspoke, it sounded like you guys both agree that the LEQ method was the agreed upon method, the average time method, which, if I'm reading this right, is the lower bar on these graphs. And so if we're talking about the track here, not elsewhere, it does look like you never even go above 80 to that 75.5, I think that's what you guys were talking about. So I guess justify for us, if you would, why the extra 15 decibels there.
In the fall, when the leaves are off the trees, and in the spring, you're going to have probably a 5 to 7 decibel higher reading than what this is. The direction the wind's blowing is going to have an impact on the sound. Again, just trying to come up with something that I don't want to be up here again doing this again. I would like this to be the last time I have to do this. And as technology changes, I'm assuming if there's a better muffler out there, I don't have a problem with going to a better muffler. You know, I don't want the citizens of this town to not like the track. I got no reason to have anybody hate the track, so I will do what I can to continue to keep it. Most of those sound readings you're looking at came from whatever we call other tracks. That's where we pulled them from. You know, and if the city goes out there with a little handheld meter, you know, they're going to get those spikes at 85 to 90 decibels. That's where they're going to be at. You know, the handheld meters that they use. So that's kind of what we're looking at. If they're going to be out there with a handheld meter, you're going to have it where those spikes are at. If that's how you're going to take it. And the time-weighted average, the highway department, and just about everybody uses the time-weighted average over 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour, and some of it's a 24-hour period. So the way you take those readings is a huge difference on where they need to be.
Another question that I had was, okay, so the graphs that we're looking at are based off a 1 minute time weighted average, correct? Is that what you said, or is it a 3 minute?
1.
1 minute.
Well, the last one we did was 1. The one that they did before that the city had done was a 3 minute.
Yeah. And so, why are we asking for a 1 hour time weighted average versus a 3 minute time weighted average?
We can, however you want to take the sound reading, it just needs to be something that I can live with.
Okay.
You know, if we do a test, it needs to be done. I want to know if we do a sound test, I want to know how it's going to be taken.
Sure.
And that seems, I haven't found anything that's under 1 hour time weighted average. Of all the tests I looked at, I didn't find any under that. And most of them are around 3, a 3 hour time weighted average.
Is that for racetracks?
sound in general. Construction sites, it's just something that the EPA and anybody that's concerned about sound, it's the way they take the test.
Okay.
OSHA, I mean, there's pretty much everybody has a little variation on it, but they're all pretty close to the same.
What is, and again, I know it was said earlier, but just for clarification, what's the current curfew that you run by?
There is none.
There is no current curfew. What do you typically shut down by?
I never have went past 11 o'clock. At 11 o'clock, checkered flag comes out. I'm done.
Now, when you do your races, is it, and I'm going to be honest, I don't go to races very often. But for my clarification, when you do your races, do you have several different types of mods? Do you have, or classes, rather?
We run usually 4 classes of cars, 4 to 5 classes of cars.
Okay, so you'll run the louder classes first, and then
we run the quietest class of cars last.
Okay.
The loudest cars are the cars that people come to see, the feature class, and we run those next to last. And I don't think we ever went past 10 o'clock this year with our feature class.
Okay.
The only time we might go past 10 o'clock with a feature class if it's a special where it's basically it may be every car out there may be a feature class where you've got 60 or 70 cars in the same class and you got to do qualifying and stuff. So that would be the only time that you would probably have the louder cars that went through the whole program. You wouldn't have a quiet class to run last.
So, one concern the city had was if I heard this right, the 1,200 foot from center property line. How do you answer that?
The only place that we have a problem with the sound reading is on the north property line, and that's the place that is closest to the track. If you look at the sound study the city did, there's 2 of the spots that are over 1,200 feet. Property line are over 1,200 feet. I would just like to come up with a point to where if it's 1,000 feet, 1,200 feet, I don't care what it is, but that's where we take it every place, you know. On the north side of the track, I mean, you can get within, 400 or 500 feet of the track. You know, it's a industrial area, M1 zoning, there's no houses there, so if you push it out to 1,000 or 1,200 feet, I'm not stuck on 1,200 feet. The only reason I come with 1,200 feet, there's 2 points at the track that are over 1,200, so I was trying to just come up with an average where whenever we take it, no matter where we're at, it's not that we're louder at the north boundary line, it's we're closer to the sound at the north boundary line. We're not louder over there, it's closer to where we're taking the test.
I'm going to laugh a little bit at you. Your idea of an average is 1,200 feet is kind of funny to me, just because on the north side and the south side, you're looking at just a few 100-foot boundary line. I agree that we need to come up with something. I'm looking at the boundary line here. So from the center of the track to the north boundary line is maybe 300 feet.
Mm-hmm.
And from the center of the track to the south boundary line, again, is a little bit less than 300 feet.
If you look at the south boundary line where you come off the freeway, it's about 1,400 feet.
If you go all the way out and then back around, yes. But if you go straight to the boundary line, like sound would travel, because it's not going to go down the road and take a left.
The boundary line of this current conditional use permit is the road. It's 40 highway.
It's 40 highway.
And it's about 1,400 feet.
Okay.
That is the current, I say, the CUP that was just canceled, that it was the boundary line of the entire property that went out to 40 highway.
Okay, which is about 1,200 feet.
Correct.
Okay. So I agree, really the one that we're looking at, the biggest issue is going to be that north boundary line. For the city, in the past, where have you done your measurements from?
I mean, as close as we could get, north, south, east, and west to the property lines. I'm going to pass out, because we throw out this 1,200 feet thing, just so you know what 1,200 feet is.
Would be helpful.
It might not be exact on the center, but it's pretty close using the GIS.
When you look at it, this is one of the things when we talk about not having control over some of those things that change if we did the 1,200 feet, when this whole thing started, that was basically all one property, that entire area that's there. So football fields, the sand drags, the Valley Speedway, that was all one property under one owner. And you know, like Dennis bought the racetrack and everything else has kind of been divided up. So going forward, I mean, I think it makes, the reason we think the property line number makes sense, and that's what we need to figure out what the proper sound rating would be. That's not going to change. You're bounded by the railroad tracks there on the north. That property line is not going to change. The south, that's going to be hard pressed to change. Now that would go into the sand drags. The east and west, that's kind of what it's been. I mean, to answer your question, basically the end of Harris Street there was kind of considered the west property line when we did the test. And then east, I mean, you basically have to go through Mr. Shroud's property to get back there. When we did the last sound study, we went out with Mr. Shroud's consultant, and to go to the east one, I mean, we basically do all the way across there and across the creek and try to find that property line. But when we talked about already having data, that was one of the reasons that I included these studies in there, is because the north line is close, and that's where these are taken from. So we know what that number is. When we start moving that out, who knows what that, I mean, just like Miss Sample sitting in her neighborhood there, it's not, she can hear it in her house, it's not real loud. When she talks about going around the corner, it's not that big of a subdivision to be able to change that level. And it's kind of with this, if we go from being on the north property line right now, and we go out to 1,200 feet there, it just seems to me like we'd be going down a path where we don't know exactly what it is that we're dealing with.
Well, there'll never be houses there. It's all M1 zoning. It's industrial area. I mean, I'm not sure I guess what point you're trying to make, that, you know, if you want to come up here to the closest property line, I mean, I don't think that's hardly fair to the racetrack to try to get as close as you can.
From staff's point of view, that's where these numbers came from your consultant. They were at that north
But if we
line.
make it 1,000 feet or 1,200 feet, to where it's the same no matter where we take it at, I mean.
I think what he might be getting at is we don't know what 1,000 feet out numbers are. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, we don't.
So, sure we do. Sure we do. We got 3 points that are over 1,000 feet, or 1,000 feet. There's 3 points that are 1,000 feet.
At the same time, we know that sound doesn't go the same way each direction. I mean, that's like if that was the case, it would have been the same at 40 highway, or old 40 highway, as it was at Harris.
It has trees. I mean, there's going to be things that come in it, but if you take 1,000 feet or whatever the number is from the racetrack, it's going to be the same measurement no matter where you take it. I mean, if you're going to try to take it to the closest point to the racetrack, I mean, what's the point of taking it anywhere else?
Where did you see that pointing out to 1,000 feet numbers? Because I may have just overlooked it. I don't know how we decide this any other way. But you guys have provided decibel numbers based upon property line, but we don't have any decibel numbers, or I don't have any in front of me anyway, maybe we do, for where those studies were taken. That might be helpful to see those.
If you look, well, the one down here is the south study, the one over here is the west study, east study, and north study. If you just look at the map, the sound readings were taken northeast, south, and west is how we determined it. Especially the property line.
Yep.
I didn't get this information until just tonight, so I haven't had a chance to look at what he's giving me.
It all says north property line.
Yeah, it is. That's what.
Let me talk to this again.
Okay.
When Mr. Shroud, the city, started talking about, how we're going to measure decibels, because the problem is that it's so dynamic depending on where you go to measure it. So what we did was, Dennis and Ken and I talked about what's the worst case scenario. And the worst case scenario for Valley Speedway is the north property line. That's where the sound readings have always been the highest because it's the closest to the track. And so as we were trying to move through this, we didn't want to compare apples to oranges and say, well, we know at 400 feet it's 75.5, so let's bump it out to 1,200 and guess that it's 70. I mean, we wanted to use concrete data that we had. And I think what may be getting lost here is that we're not trying to move the sound readings in any closer. We're just trying to tie it to the concrete data that we have from the sound studies.
Right.
This was a feature race, A mods with 20 cars on the track. It's not going to get any louder than that down there. I mean, it just isn't. So we're not trying to encroach closer to the racetrack. We're just trying to tie it back to some concrete data that we haven't put that in the CP. So if that means that it needs to reflect, it can't exceed on the north property line. I mean, we know that's the problematic area. It doesn't matter what it's reading down on 40 Highway because we can always go straight to that north property line and know where it's going to be the loudest at.
Because that's the worst case scenario.
Correct.
Okay.
Question for the city. Where are the complaints coming from as a general direction? All over the city, a north direction, south? Is there some way?
Well, and that was kind of the other part of this, is when you said the worst case, because that historically has been where most of the complaints are coming from, is from the north. I mean, out on most of these meetings, we've had very few from south or west that have come to complain. So when trying to put something together in a new permit that makes sense for everybody, that's why we've gone to this north line, because we have numbers now that Mr. Shrout's sound expert put together and measured, so we know that that's there. Because that's kind of been the thing all along is, where do these numbers come from? It's just we threw a number at it. Well, that's what we've tried to do is we feel like this is good data that Mr. Shrout's consultant came up with. So let's run with that number, or that spot, and with these numbers that we have, come up with something that works. Because that is where most of the problems have come from.
Okay, for Mr. Shrout, I've been in a couple of races. I know you got semi set up out there for north. Is there some, I don't know, is there some way of buffering even more on the north side?
Put in $100,000 zone wall.
No, I understand that, but I don't know.
Again, understand what everybody's saying. The place where most complaints are coming from, there's a 3 decibel difference. Keep that in mind. It's just because they can hear it. They can call a complaint, they'll still call a complaint, I'm sure. But there's 3 decibels difference in the Woodbury subdivision. That's where most of the complaints come from. There was 3 decibel difference between the night we didn't race and the night we did race. Taking one night apart, took one Friday, one Saturday. I'm sure in the future, I will continue to do what I can to make it quieter, and have no reason to be before anybody talking about sound. That's the reason I want to get this at some place I know I can live with. If you're looking at these numbers, if you're going to take it exactly the way we took it, all I would say is you need to be 5 to 7 decibels above where this is in case there's a strong south wind the night they take it. If it's cold, if there's no leaves on the trees, don't screw it down to where best case scenario, this is where you got to be. That would be the only input, or the main input I would have for the sound issue. If you want to make it the north boundary lines where we're going to take it, I would guess, they took it at Harris Street, which probably, if you look at Harris Street.
No, this was when we went out there, I can show you here, we went out with Mr. Liptime, we actually came, like it was that little spur right there, and it's actually right on the hillside. So it's not even technically your property line, it's the north right-of-way line for the railroad track. And it's just kind of an open field there is where we put the monitor on the post.
That is the closest place to the track you can get without coming across railroad tracks, I guess. On my side, yeah. Well, no. It's actually, it's closer to the Harris Street. It's probably, Harris Street would be another, 150, 200 feet past where you guys do it?
Well, Harris would be the west line. That's
I'm sorry, I'm talking about the one that goes down past the city.
James Road.
James Road, yeah. On the north side. Yeah, it's right there where the railroad tracks, right? Right on the other side of the railroad tracks is the closest spot. Yeah, Harris Street is about 1,200 foot to Harris Street, approximately.
Yeah, cul-de-sac there.
So technically, it's the railroad right of way.
In my mind, there's two things that we just need to agree on. There's one, the location of where we're going to do the sound studies. And two, what that decibel limit needs to be.
And how it's taken.
Well, I think we've all agreed on how it's going to be taken. That's going to be using the LEQ.
But still the time.
The time period, the weighted average.
Like I said, I think the city, they was using a 3 minute.
Correct.
We used 1 minute whenever we did it. Every minute it took a sound reading. I mean, for 6 hours. We took a sound reading every minute for 6 hours. That's what we did. On a race night and a non-race night. We did one Friday night and then one Saturday night. That's what we did.
So then, so what you're saying for the 1 hour time limit is you'll take a reading every minute for an hour and then average that together, and then that's what you're.
That is what I proposed. I mean, I think that what you guys are looking at was a spike. You guys looking at the spikes? Is that what you were doing? For
No, the numbers that they're going off of are what, when we had Mr. Liptide just look at the feature events, because the thing that we think needs to be monitored is what the sound is when the races are going on. I mean, that's the whole issue. So, and what you have in front of you and what planning and zoning have, it's just exactly what your consultant sent us. So that yellow area, that's why the feature races are actually going on. So they vary in time. I mean, I think one you had 8 yellows, so the race was 36 minutes long, right. And the next one was maybe 6. So that's where we had caught, the 3 minute averaging would work. And yeah, basically it's taking out the highs and the lows in that 3 minute period. So you get an average. You're not getting penalized for one loud noise. It's not going to throw everything off.
It looks like the highest one was just right at 85 decibels. Is that correct? Looking at your data on July the 16th on the north property line, just right under 85 decibels.
No, I don't. No, the highest LEQ is 75.5. And I would clarify, this is not our data. This is what Mr. Lichtide supplied. Because he puts in there what the peak is. But we're not looking at the peak.
That was okay, but that was the LEQ for that time weighted average for that distance.
Correct.
Which is going to be hard. So the high reading for that race was right at 85 decibels, correct?
On the bottom chart there,
75.
I don't know. Yeah,
on July 16th, north property line, July 16th.
Yeah.
Future race.
Can you show me what you're looking at?
And again, to reiterate, springtime, no leaves, cold weather, it's going to be 5 to 7 decibels higher. Okay. So whatever you see on there, had it been a cold spring or cold fall, probably somewhere 5 to 7 decibels higher than what you're seeing. Just again.
You mentioned that these readings were taken over a 6-hour period. Do you know roughly the time that the 6 hours occurred?
It was from 4 o'clock, no, it was 5 o'clock to 11 o'clock. We went to our curfew.
Thank you.
Is that right? 5 and we did both of them the same way. The Friday night, they were both identical tests from that time period, and we did them in 4 different spots. He just shows you the north one here. We actually did them, 5 spots. We did north, south, east, west, property line at the racetrack, and then the Woodbury one, we did, it was the 5th one we did. And the city, you have all that information.
Yeah, we did, and like Mr. Hunt said earlier, we kind of put this one out there just because it is the worst case.
I understand.
Yeah.
Ken, just to clarify from the city, you guys agree with what I understood with that discussion that, for instance, July 16th, it is moving up close to the 85 mark.
Yeah, it's going to depend on how we want to do that. If we want to I mean, if you take a 1 minute average and you want to say it's for that race event and you average those 1 minute times, that's something that could be done. I mean, I think that's the point of tonight, is getting an agreement on what everybody's comfortable with as far as measuring that sound, so there is no question going forward.
May 17th races seem to be quite a bit quieter. So.
Yeah, I think that July 16th race was that was our loudest last party. We were wanting to get some kind of an idea of worst case scenario. I want to have it this where worst case scenario that I'm not breaking the condition that should we come to an agreement on one.
Ken, what's the difference between this conditional use permit and the one that the Board of Aldermen revoked? What's the big difference between the two? Have you said that before?
In the packet, I just put what the old conditions were in there, where it lists like the 65 decibels. I think one thing on our side, I don't know that we necessarily, in our side, I mean staff, not to say that what was there before isn't important, but when the board kind of gave the direction to work on a new permit, I mean, part of that's kind of saying that there is a racetrack there. What's a number that makes sense? One of the arguments that's come up, again and again, is because the sound was the big thing that came up. Well, where did that number come from? And so I don't know if it's even relevant what the old number was if we're moving forward. The other things that were in there were some things that were kind of Central Jackson County related. I don't think we're going down that. I think we're leaving that to them. I don't think that's something we're going to get into with that as far as the fire lane and that kind of thing. I mean, I assume they probably do their yearly inspection like they do with most businesses. So that would be a difference for what we're looking at tonight, I guess, compared to what was there before.
Well, he can race pretty much 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, which we know he's not going to do. But
And I guess I should mention that too. That was one of the other things, was there wasn't a whole lot there to even know what was acceptable and what wasn't. So the idea with this one, I guess, is being more specific on what's being asked for and what's being expected. So that's, we talk about race events and sound and how it's measured, that kind of thing. I think that was the idea with this new permit, was having something where you could look at it and the rules were clear on it. And not clear, I guess, they were agreed upon going forward.
So do you have any issue with the whole school night question that the city has?
I would like the option, should a event come available, at least to be able to come to the council and ask that I could, for the most part, no, I don't think I've ever had one on a Wednesday school night. No, I say never, maybe one in 7 years, 6 years, however long I've been on the track. So there might have been one but most of them, if you look, are in May, June, July, August is whenever we try to schedule the Wednesday night shows, the week night shows.
And then as to the concerns that they brought up about the quieter events, I see some of their concerns. It's a little ambiguous in terms of what you might be asking. So are you wanting no limitation on the quantity of events, or that they just be not regulated under the permit? Well, if I read it, says city will not limit quieter events. Are you asking no limitation?
Let's say I want to have a go-kart event, let's say, or and again, the motorcycle events, the way I understand it, are grandfathered. Is that a correct assumption?
Sorry, we were over here.
Yes. Yes.
So and again, it's an event that's not going to be noisy. I mean, the motorcycle events, the demolition derbies, stuff like that was already being done out there at this facility prior to the racetrack being built. So I guess what I was saying was anything that was being done before coming into the city limits isn't something that's going to count against my 45 events. And I may never have more than 45 events.
So the number of events then?
Correct.
Okay.
Can I clarify something? I mean, the motocross track is grandfathered in. With demolition derbies, I don't think those would be grandfathered in. because they haven't been run continuously. So since the motocross track has been run continuously, it's grandfathered in. I don't think we've got issues with demolition derbies, but I just want to clarify that it's not.
Yeah, they did them out there before before this is out. If we did one, it would be one a year. And it may be that it's going to fall into the 45 dates. I mean, it may not be a big deal one way or the other. I just don't want to get into a situation where I've got expenses to meet, and the only way I meet is, and some of these running events, and I think they've already agreed to that if we have a running event, we have another one coming up this year in May that it draws, a couple of thousand people. It's a non-motorized event, so I don't want that to be counted as one of my events. I would just want the car races, I guess, counted as my 45 events. And it may not make any difference, but I just don't want to get in that box. I want to address it now rather than later.
How many events do you think those 6 or so areas make up in a year? Go-karts, tractor pulls, demo derbies, motorcycle, non-motorized, events with less than 10 cars. How many of those?
If you count everything I've got listed there, it could be as many as 25 in a year. But again, that's running events, and if you want to count everything listed there.
I just want to touch on the non-motorized stuff is not part of this. That's not something that's part of that whole conditional use permit. So, like I said, the Tough Mudders or whatever, that kind of stuff is not in any way associated with this.
Probably the only thing I could see possibly if we wanted to do any go-kart events, and there's nothing on the table right now. Just for future development of the facility, I just don't want to get in a situation where somebody says, well, you can't do that. And from a sound issue, it's not going to be a problem. I just don't want it to count it against my events. Same way as the motorcycle events that we've done out there all along. There's going to be some motorcycle events that we will do out there. And it's not a noise issue event, but I don't want somebody coming out there saying, well, you've already ran X number of events, counting those events that aren't a sound issue type of event that is a problem.
I'm concerned about the number of events as long as he sustains to the sound issues with the CEP, and I don't think that's going to be an issue.
Yeah, I think that's it. The only noise issue, and I've not been to a lot of tractor pulls, but I understand it can be pretty loud, or they can be. So that was the only question I had.
If you want to put this tractor, take it out, that's fine. I've only done one in 7 years, so.
Certain classes are only going to be loud. Your multi-engine tractors.
Yeah.
Most of your farm tractors that they run tractor pulls are turbine. They're not loud.
Right.
Those are usually during the day.
Exactly. They're during the day. You might have your premier class at night, but it's
Tractor pulled at midnight.
Yeah. The reason I have 11 o'clock curfew because 11 o'clock I'm ready to go home. I don't care if the race is over.
It sucks getting old, doesn't it?
Yes.
Speak for yourself.
What about practicing?
One car on the track at a time. Whenever we do a test and tune in March, with one car out there, I guarantee nobody's in there. I don't want that to be counted. If we're doing testing, my insurance company will be out there, so you're not going to.
I just want to change the wording on that bottom section you just referred to, so the city would not look at the number of rider events.
Yeah. Because once we motion for that, let's get into some other language. Okay.
So we just need to kind of agree on decimal. And I think.
Are you finished before we cut you off?
Yeah, no.
Okay.
Unless you guys have any more questions.
Thank you very much. So now is let's move on to the action items portion of our meeting tonight.
Well,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Can I say one more thing? I don't think I heard anybody really say anything in opposition about your track. And I know there are a lot of people out there that really don't like the noise limit, so I guess I'm going to say something that I know that there's a lot of people out there that don't like the noise, especially the people that live pretty close. I live probably a mile and a half away, just live right up the street from Scott. And I can hear your track inside of my house in the summertime with the windows closed, the air conditioner on, and the TV running. Now, it's not that obnoxious to me, but I know it is. If I lived closer down by Artie Mize and Buckner Tarsney, it would be very loud to me. Now, I know you're going to do what you can to keep it quiet, but I'm not sure that you're gonna do enough to keep it quiet, to keep people from still complaining. And I think we'll still get a lot of complaints if you go ahead with this conditional use permit, no matter what you do. You know, if you put mufflers on.
Keep something in mind, the sand drag track, which is probably, if you want to take some sound readings, probably 135 decibels when they race. They can race 7 days a week, 24 hours a day if they choose to. And a lot of that noise you're talking about hearing isn't me. Just, again, I'm not trying, but those real loud noises you hear aren't me.
What distinguishes that, the ability? Is that just a grandfather?
So, I mean, whenever people call and say, we heard this horribly loud, don't automatically assume it's me. Because that's going to be a problem you're going to have in the future. In fact, there was 1 year the racetrack was closed, and before I bought it, they had an issue with the bleachers out there, and they shut down. And they told me out front that they had more complaints that year than they ever had, and we weren't even running. We didn't even run that year, and they had complaints every week.
You know, I think we'll still continue to get complaints. So I don't know if this is going to solve the problem. Just reading through the notes, it looks like every other Board of Alderman meeting, somebody comes and complains about the noise. Is that a true statement? I mean, I don't come here to Board of Alderman meetings, but.
Well, I think the thing to remember too is the permit that was in place before, that sound level wasn't being met. So it was against the permit. And I think it's one of the things going forward. That's the point of having the public hearings and that, is figuring out what that balance is, so we get that down on paper, so we actually, we know what it is. With any law, I mean, there's going to be some people that are happy with it and some that aren't, but it's having something that everybody agrees upon, so going forward we can say, well, he's meeting what's in the permit, he's following the law. So that answers the question, but
our question is, do we even give him a conditional use permit? That is an option to not even give him a conditional use permit. Is that true?
Well, I mean, you always have a decision, yeah.
And then it's up to the Board of Aldermen. If they want to go ahead and do it, it's up to them.
True. I mean, it is an application, but.
So yeah, we've got a couple, I guess, options at this point. If we're going to close the hearing, we don't have to approve anything, but we can entertain a motion to approve or to discuss further. Conditional use permit. Like Bob suggested, we don't have to do anything at all. A lot of the questions I think asked for are to take advisement from the board who's suggesting we work something out. And so I think that's where this thing was steered to. So the action items closes the public comment portion. And I say that just so we can maintain some semblance of order as we discuss. So gives us the ability to discuss freely without a lot of the pressure from whatever. So we're going to close the public comment, and if there's a motion on the table, then we can discuss whatever motion that is and work out details if there are. So do we have a motion?
I move that we discuss the conditions of the potentially new conditional use permit.
So we've got a motion and a second on the floor. Any discussion on those motions? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, none opposed. So let's go ahead and discuss a potential conditional use permit for racetrack facility at 348 East Old US Highway 40.
I don't have any problem. Measurement and do it. It's been being measured at, and we'll go with the North property line. As long as there's a consistent spot and it's set where it can be measured at the same place every time, I think that would be the way to do it. You don't want to do a huge radius. Let's just say that it's to be measured at the North property line.
But you want to go off just the one property line? The north property line?
Yes, it's
the shortest distance.
It's the shortest distance. And that's where all of the measurements that we have, that's where all the measurements that we have were taken from.
That's where the measurements on these readings were taken all from that point?
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
Which that'd be the worst case scenario.
Right.
Theoretically, so
Right.
it's not going to get louder. Right. Although it shouldn't.
Well, if you have a train along with the races at the time, who knows? I don't know if we had a train go through at that time when they were pulling those readings. Do you?
No, the train went through, I mean, it spikes below.
I know, way high. I mean, that could be an issue. if you actually have both of them at the same time.
Yeah, we have to take that into account.
Well, but there again, right, you have to take it into account.
So James, back to the number of races, in terms of the day of the week, anybody have any issue with the Saturday, or every Saturday, every other Friday, is that's what's proposed here? Plus one weeknight?
But the week
Well,
night,
it's 7 per year. It could
Right,
be
yes.
7 in a row,
right.
or 1 per 7 weeks.
The one thing I would like to limit is the ability to do it during a school night. And just say that you guys would have to come back and ask the board or get approval for an event, for a special event
permit or something.
during the school night. And I'm just trying to keep the complaints off your back, Dennis, because they're gonna be coming if you do it on a school night. It'll be loud and mad mamas.
That could be a problem though too. If a lot of these sanctioning bodies, when they come in and they want to run say a weeknight, their schedules are limited. He may not know the schedule until February. Is that going to be enough time to come present the issue with the city at that time to run that date or not?
It's the city.
I mean, how can they grant it within a week or whatever? Okay.
Worst case scenario, 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Worst case scenario, 2 weeks.
Okay, so going down the list here, the sound issue seems to be a pretty big one, so. Looks like during what was considered to be the loudest time, during using 1 minute averages, the LEQ didn't quite reach 85, but came close.
Right, I was at 83. No, it's just under 85. It's 84.
And that's a 1 minute average, so we can, mathematically, I don't know what it would be, we can assume it would be a little bit lower.
Change it to a 3 minute weighted average.
I think the 3 minute, I mean, I'm no audiologist, but
I actually think it was a little better since we have 3 minute weighted versus 1 minute. Now, what about decibels? I think 90 is a little bit high.
90 was never hit here, and the only thing we've got is conjecture, and it might go up in the fall. I mean, it likely will, we just don't know the number. So,
Spring and fall.
or the spring.
Of course, going to races when we don't have lead buffering some of the sound or whatever the case may be, or the wind's blowing that direction.
So all I've got really is your statements affecting that we can expect a 5 to 7 decibel influx. Do you guys have any comment on that in terms of what that might mean? Or if you guys have checked anything?
The only thing I would say, even if we look back at the 2010 study that the city had done, there was the 2 property lines that were over, but using that 3 minute average, I think even the north line was
66.
I think it was under.
Maybe it was 70.
No.
It was 73, and that was the average.
That was
Yeah, that was a 3 minute, and that was for the north, and I think maybe the south line was 67. There were 2 that were over that 65 at that point.
73 on the north.
And that was during what you're proposing would be more peak sound seasons?
Yeah, I mean, there's been, I think perception has been different in the different seasons, but I don't know that we've seen a huge number difference as far as actual sound level.
During different times and different nights, I can hear it in my house. This year, the last 2 years have been relatively quiet.
And one of the things that's come out kind of too is sometimes it's not even necessarily like the actual sound level that's changing. It's almost more of like a tone.
Still the
yeah, that's right. That's something that's not going to be picked up by any measure. So,
well, this is just me, but without, we've got a statement which is believable, but I don't have anything to go off scientifically from that. These charts at least tell us that they're below 85, that what the maximum is. So this is just discussion, but I think 85 is probably good.
I did some research. The maximum that I found on most of your Schoenfeld mufflers is 95 decibels. Just take it at the car.
At the car?
At the car. When I did my research, almost all the tracks require Schoenfeld mufflers, and they're rated 95 decibels.
So that'd be more.
The functional race muffler.
That's at the car.
To, Dennis. The functional race muffler that you're referring to, is that similar to the Schoenfeld muffler?
The Schoenfeld he's talking about is one of our spec mufflers. We have 3 they have to run, and that's one of them.
Okay.
And that's kind of what we shot for. And that's at the car within 75 to 100 feet of the car.
Okay.
Almost every sanctioning body that I did research on runs the same muffler, or the 3 different types of mufflers.
Sure.
All sanctioning bodies.
And what were they?
They were ASCS, World of Outlaws, All-Star Midgets, IMCA, USAC, 95, at the car.
At the car.
At the car.
So, okay, that's fine, but what are we going to say at the property line? Or we'll say just north of the tracks.
At North Track, I couldn't tell you. If they're running that Schoenfeld muffler, it is what these readings are. I know there are some states that are more stringent than what Missouri is. I believe it was Oregon was 80 was the maximum. Now, how they acquired that, I'm not sure. I know the state did their readings. So does Washington. Washington does their readings, and so does the state of Florida. They actually have government officials come out and measure the readings.
Mr. Renaud, just to kind of give you, we pulled that 2010 study, and at the near the north property line, the LEQ in that study was 74, so it's not really a whole lot different than when Mr. Shrout's consultant did the work. That seems like it's been fairly consistent there, and that's 4 years later.
Okay, is that the high mark and then the post 10 p.m. mark? Any differences there? So 85 and 80. And then in terms of the per car issue we were talking about a second ago, the 95. So it sounds like you agree 95 is a pretty standard marker per car.
The ones that I talked to said it was in 100 feet, 95. And they had a rope they just put on the car and went out 100 feet, and I think it was at around 3,000 RPM.
I saw 3,000 to 4,000 RPMs when I saw. Well, I researched.
The difference between what I'm hearing you say is at the car versus 100 feet.
Well, 100 feet. 100 feet.
Okay.
I mean, we're not talking 1,200 feet. We're talking 100 feet.
Okay.
And I did talk to some of the drivers and some of the people that I know. They've never been checked. They check to see if the muffler's on the car. You can tell if there's a muffler on the car. And they're not allowed to run. If you don't have a muffler, you're not allowed to run, period.
Do you check every vehicle at your events?
Yeah. We have a pre-tech. All your cars go through pre-tech, and we check mufflers to pre-tech.
When it fired up, it checks that you're going to hear it, trust me.
Absolutely. There's a big difference. Big difference.
So I'm fine with that.
Okay.
The 7-week night events I'm fine with, but I want the caveat about the school nights.
Okay, I got that. And then sounds like we don't care about the number of these so-called quieter races.
No, not the number.
Okay.
No,
I just want them to comply with the same DB requirements, it sounds like, as everything else. Okay, how about a length of time if we were to move forward on this for the permit?
3 years. That's my suggestion. We won't be doing this every year. See how it goes the first 3 years, then we can adjust to that after we
And
hit the 3
then
years.
in terms of the checks, do we want to specify a period of when that's going to happen, or per year, do a check and make sure we're in compliance, or
What was the last one?
On the number of checks per year, I mean, can we say we'd like the city to do at a minimum of, say, 3 checks per year, mid, or beginning, mid, and end, to make sure that Mr. Stroud's in compliance?
What's the cost of the check?
Or are you only going to do the checks whenever there are complaints?
I don't know if we, to answer your question, if we did it, would likely be in-house with that. I don't know if we had a set time in mind to do them. I mean, I think it was more a periodic, or if we're getting complaints, then we go out and verify that, yeah, he's getting complaints, but he's within the confines of the permit, so we can tell them that. So I don't know if we had like specific
I think maybe what I'd like to see is a minimum of 3 random checks per year. I'm not going to say you have to do it at this time, and this time, but I think that we need to actively monitor for a few reasons. One, to protect Mr. Stroud, make sure that he can continue to do business, and 2, to protect the community and make sure that he's staying under what he says he's going to do.
so we'd be compelling the city to do that. It probably shouldn't be on him if we did it. That'd be
What I'm saying is that the city has their handheld device that they can utilize to check. Or do you guys have something? I mean,
yeah, and to agree with Mr. Renault, I don't think our intent was to put this on him to go and do this out of city. I think it was on us to patrol. But with that, I don't know if that's something that necessarily gets included in here. I think that's more kind of a directive from you and the board that says you will go out and check 3 times. Because I think the things that we put in here are what we're expecting Mr. Shroud to do as the operator of the racetrack.
Okay, and then if there are there any built-in regulations that need to be added to this in terms of if there's non-compliance after a month in, we're going to allow the CUP to just ride it out for the next 2 years and 11 months, or do we need like a time to cure those issues if there are complaints? Or
yeah, I mean, I think that's one thing that we've discussed. You know, under the ordinances, they do address when revocation can occur, and there's no right to cure period in the ordinance itself. But if you want to put it in the conditional use permit, you know, because there's no written notification or anything like that that's required under the ordinance.
So it's just automatic revocation?
No, it is not automatic revocation. But if there's one violation, the way the ordinances, without being modified, read are, if there's a violation, a conditional use permit can be revoked. You've got to give notice, and there has to be a hearing on that. But it can be revoked for, you know, one single violation. So I think one thing that we would probably suggest would be, if there is a violation of the conditional use permit, that the city needs to provide Mr. Shroud written notice and give him 30 days to fix the violation. So that way we don't, if there's just one violation, you don't get ordinance violation tickets or anything like that, that there is a time period to fix it before it gets escalated. I mean, I think, Dennis, I don't know if you've got thoughts or something.
I would tend to agree with that. I mean, if there's something wrong, I would like to know it to where I can address it.
Okay.
And something else, on the where the test is taken at, it's on the north side of the railroad tracks. I would like to keep it, that's where we've always done it. And that's not really the property line. Put it at the north side of the railroad tracks at the north property line, to where all of our data, that's where it's at. And I don't know if we put it on this side of the railroad tracks, it may change this data. I don't know. So,
I don't know what
we can actually replicate that location and include it in the CUP. So if the planning and zoning has a recommendation for a CUP, basically what that gives us is we're going to move forward to the board. Well, we're going to continue to work with you as we prepare the ordinance for the board of aldermen. So
we could actually put an exhibit together that shows the spot that we'll go off of. So there's no question about it.
Yeah, I think so. Okay, any other specifics?
Just one other thing that's in the ordinances, are just general compliance with land use ordinances and construction and building codes. So I think that may be some, I mean, that's in the ordinances. I mean, obviously everybody in the city has to comply with.
That'll trump.
With building codes. So I don't know if we need to do any building code inspections or anything, prior to, opening up or anything like that. But the building codes all apply. So that may be something that we want to mention in the conditional use permit as well.
So then, other than these issues that we're specifically dealing with, building codes, what else? Generally, the city code ought to be followed. That's your...
Yes. Yeah. I mean, all of the city code, obviously it all has to apply. But if there's anything regarding, just because this is a different structure in the city than any other structure, because there's going to be a significant amount of people there, whether the city needs to check on an annual basis as opposed to checking building codes when there's a complaint. Just because of the number of people.
The city doesn't check it already?
Well, no, there's no set schedule where the city checks. The city checks. The city can check whenever it wants
right.
to.
I didn't know if the city had been making checks or not.
There's no set schedule. It's not like the fire department that would have an annual check.
So you guys have the freedom to do these checks. You don't want to be precluded from it, which I don't think that's what we're talking about.
So any other business?
Right, and I think what we're saying is, do we want to be having notified the city, I plan on opening up on this date, so this, if you're going to have 2,000 people out there, so the city can know there's going to be 2,000 people out there, and maybe we want to go check it out since, it's been closed all winter, to make sure that everything out there is still safe.
Because that's a requirement in the code already.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I think maybe part of what Mr. Geary's touching on there too is that, every year things change. I'm sure Dennis tries to add new things every year. I think whether it's a structure or not, I don't know, but maybe kind of more like what the fire department does, having that annual inspection, just going out there strictly from a public safety point of view. I mean, we've talked all night about how that is a destination place. There are a lot of people there. Just making sure that everything's still ready to go after the winter, basically. I think would be the way to look at that.
Well, you don't need us to do that, though, right? I mean, we don't need to authorize your ability to inspect it, do we?
No, but what we're saying in the CUP is that we are recommending that they probably should do a yearly inspection of the facilities prior to the opening season race to make sure that he is in compliance with all of the city building codes, because the city can go in and inspect any time, but we're saying because of, one, it is a destination place, because of the number of individuals that go there, because of the type of event that happens, we want to put that extra measure in there to make sure that it's a safe environment for all the citizens of Green Valley and everybody else to go to.
Sure, I think I understand the purpose. I don't know if we can
shackle
him with our job.
Yeah, I'm all about safety, but it seems like I don't. Unless we're holding every business, do we inspect? Do we go in and inspect Casey's? Do we go and inspect Casey's because he's having a race that weekend? No.
The football fields.
So why are we singling out the Speedway?
Yeah,
I don't understand this at all.
I don't think that was the intent. I think the intent more being a racetrack is a typical type. Okay, you ride at Casey's. Casey's is built. There's not a whole lot that's going to change with the Casey's, whereas a lot of racetracks on a yearly basis, on the off season, they make improvements to the racetrack, and I think the comments were more based towards when those improvements are made, making sure that that is when we're out there notified that something's going on, that they're changing, and that we're ensuring that it does meet those codes.
Mr. Stroud, would you be against having a yearly inspection just to make sure that the facilities is up to par prior to season?
I'll be honest with you, yes.
Why is that?
My insurance company comes out every year before we open up and goes through it and tells me any changes I need to make. And I'll be quite honest with you, I don't want the city in my business. I don't have a problem with all your codes and stuff, and we have to comply with it anyway, but I don't think I should be shackled with stuff that all the other businesses don't have to do.
Well, and I understand where the city's coming from. I appreciate what you're saying. However, every other business in Green Valley doesn't have, vehicles hurling around the track at X number of miles an hour. They don't have, stands full of fans and children and everything else.
But James, that's why his insurance, I'm gonna tell you right now, I've been around racing a long time, basically my whole life, and I've been to a lot of racetracks, and I've seen people killed in the stands. And I know for a fact, his insurance company would not allow him to open that facility unless he was abiding by what they deem safe. I don't think the city goes before the school every year before they have their first football game to inspect all their facilities. And I guarantee you those stands have a lot more people in them than what the racetrack does.
Okay, then
I just don't think that, I think this is, I agree. I don't think it's
I think one of the other issues is that this, and it has nothing to do with the bleachers, but the school district had an engineer's stamped plans, and the bleachers were inspected when they were constructed. So maybe even not something annual, but yeah, insurance is not responsible for life safety. The city of Green Valley insurance is not the code authority in our city. City of Green Valley is charged with building inspections, building compliance, and life safety issues, and that's the only place where I would disagree. Yes, insurance is insuring a risk, but insurance isn't going out and inspecting buildings that we're constructing. We have a building official who does that.
That's kind of what, it seems like that ought to be the method it's checked. I would, unless I'm missing what you're saying. Like, if I build a fence, I'm supposed to get a permit too in my house. But so if he builds a new structure or something like that, I'm guessing he has to follow the same rules.
Yeah, and I think in the past, one of the things that the city's trying to get about this point is that bleachers have been installed. The city wasn't contacted, and after the fact, we went out and saw them. It has nothing to do with the construction or the material, but we just don't have any idea, the craftsmanship or what these bleachers are, or if they're even open for business. So I would say when new improvements like that are put in, that the city has an obligation to go out and inspect that and make sure that there aren't life safety issues, just like CJC goes out and does inspections on new construction.
Okay, so I think we could make it then conditional to the CUP continuing that the code's followed.
Be followed.
Yeah.
Yes.
So if he erects a structure that he didn't tell you about, CUP void.
Yeah.
Is that kind of what?
Well, it'd be
I look at Matt, but really I think it's probably just more formality. It's because that's how the code reads right now. If the building codes aren't followed, we just want to avoid that issue. We want to be up front and in the very beginning and say that the building codes are going to be followed and that new construction has to comply with reasonable life safety standards. So rather than not draw attention to that in the CUP process in a year from now, if we have problems with some sort of building construction or something new goes up, let's just be up front with it, get it out there, and realize that's an area of focus that the city wants to be involved in the future because we have that obligation.
Okay. All right, I think we're on the same page. Okay. Any other verbiage?
So what are you going to say for that?
Yeah. I tried to summarize it here, so unless there's more input, let me see if I can word this. And then James, this was your motion, so feel free to jump in, anybody but James especially. So we have a motion on the floor to consider and discuss this. Let me try to phrase it how it might be proposed. And if this is accurate, we can make a move just to propose it as I say it here in a second. So we've got a motion then to approve a conditional use permit for Dennis Strout's property at the address we already talked about, 348 East Old US 40 Highway. The proposal found just prior to page 1 of our package tonight was listed by Mr. Strout, where he proposes 45 race car events per year. Those numbers would not include the race tests and tunes, the March test and tune races, which we understand to be practice sessions. 45 events would take place between April and October, a 7-month period. It would be 2 race nights every other weekend, Saturday night 1 week, Friday and Saturday the following week. There will be an 11 o'clock p.m. curfew during race nights. The decibel limits will be 85 decibels on the high end until 10 o'clock at night, and then 80 decibels from 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock at night when the racetrack would close. We would be proposing that the tests would be conducted in the same manner as they have been on these reports that we've been provided, and to be done at the north property line, but specifically in the same spot that these tests have been conducted, which we are understanding to be in a cul-de-sac just north of the railroad tracks. Which hearing is James Railroad Court. All cars must meet 95 decibel limit measured at 100 feet. Sound measured 100 feet behind the car, tethered with a rope or some similar fashion, as defined at 3,000 to 4,000 RPMs. The weeknight races will be limited to 7 per year and defined as Monday through Thursday night events. That will not include school nights unless Mr. Shrout successfully applies to the cities for a special application for that particular event. The city would then do its due diligence to ensure that that application be processed as quickly as possible. All cars must run functional race mufflers, which we discussed, the 95 decibel limit. There will be no limitation on the amount of the events, of these quieter events listed here, being motorcycle, demo derby, truck and tractor pulls, go-kart events, any event with less than 10 cars on the track. However, those events would still follow the decibel rules. The conditional use permit would be valid for 3 years from the time the board approves it. If there, well, let me switch this here. We're also proposing that the applicant maintain full compliance with any city building codes, generally and specifically, and that all permits applications would still apply, except for the specific things mentioned in the language of the permit, so that any new construction or structures built on the property would have to follow and abide by that, just like everyone else would. The length, we discussed the length, 3 years. Should there be any violations of the conditional use permit, the city will be required to provide notice, and the applicant would have 30 days from the date of notice to cure said complaint. Make sure I'm not missing anything else. Did I miss anything?
What happens if on that last complaint, you know, if he has 30 days and 31 days and still hasn't complied, what happens at that point?
The city, I suppose, would have its ability to start the revocation process.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay. So we have discussed.
I move to accept the motion, or to accept the conditional use permit as read.
And
We
I'll
have a
second. I'll second it.
We have a second. Do we have any discussion on the conditional use permit? All right. Okay, let's have a vote then. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
Okay. I don't think we need a roll call. Do we? Okay.
I said no, I would because you
No.
know.
We do? Okay, let's have a roll call then, just for the record. Okay, Mike Renaud voted yes. James Picior?
Yes.
Kevin Browning?
Yes.
Bob DeMitt?
No.
Carrie Boardman?
Yes.
Debbie Saffel?
Yes.
Hayden Ambrose?
Yes.
Scott Schaefer?
Not vote. I can't vote.
No vote, okay.
I don't know whether to say not vote or abstain.
Abstains for procedural reasons. Okay. All right, the motion passes as read. All right. Let's move on to the next item, which is previous business. Looks like we have none. Nothing at this time. Okay. I'm sorry, 8, new business, also none. Okay. All right.
Well, the meeting's over. We've come up with the CUP, I think, that everybody can live with. There's a couple of things we need to tweak on there, but honestly, there seemed to be a really honest cooperation from the board and the city of trying to come up with something that's fair to everybody. I didn't feel any animosity at all. Didn't have anybody come up in opposition, which I'm glad they didn't, but everybody spoke positively. So our next meeting will be with the city council. They can change this. It's not binding in any way, shape, or form, but hopefully the city will take a look at it and agree. I don't think there's anything in there we can't live with. So again, stay tuned. Thank you for watching on any weekend at Valley Speedway. Looks like we're making headway. Thank you.